Rise of Silicon often herald a day of independence.
All right, welcome to this, let's say, pre-4th of July edition of Fragments of Silicon. Not that we're doing anything special for the holiday, it's just worth noting. I'm your host, Adam. Joining me as always are Petty and Gollix. Let us get to the weekly festivities. Petty, why don't you start us off this week?
Well, for anyone who was watching the reviews on Sunday, found my internet went to shit. Turns out people were doing some fireworks in the neighborhood, and we think they hit our internet line that comes in off the street to our house. And nobody's come to fix it. So the only good thing is next Tuesday we are switching to fiber internet, so I don't have to deal with this anymore. So yeah, that's gonna be fun. Mom still doesn't have a job yet, but that's kind of, getting a job nowadays is difficult, especially because she still wants to work in kind of healthcare adjacent, so they're not going to grab somebody off the street, even if they do have experience in the field. So yeah, that's been kind of nerve-wracking, but as far as gaming goes, Final Fantasy XIV came out. I might have streamed some of that. Probably going to stream more of that because I like Final Fantasy XIV. I did acquire some. Probably what are probably going to be my last couple games on the Xbox, unless on 360, unless there is another massive sale that comes about. Because I grabbed, I think it was one of the Spyro games I didn't have yet. I think it was like the reboot, like New Beginning or something like that.
Which one? Seriously.
I mean, fair, because I guess if you want to count Skylanders, it's what, the third reboot?
Something like that.
Yeah, no, I think it's like the second reboot.
Spyro has a lot of boots for a dragon.
But yeah, I'm still gonna keep an eye on it since the store closes this month. So if I find anything else worth getting, gonna kind of get it. I also want to look through the store and see what all free DLC there is, because I can download a game's DLC even if I don't own it. So I can just grab the DLC and then just, get the game later if I so desire on disc. Because see, that's a fun thing we can do with consoles is buy games off disc.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really got much off the Steam sale yet. There are a couple games I'm seeing about getting. I was kind of hoping for Rocket Knight to be on the Steam sale, but I guess not this one. I might get
It just released.
I know, but sometimes
if it's even on Steam right now.
It is on Steam. I might get Dave the Diver because it looks interesting, and is it Pacific Drive? There was like a procedurally generated driving game that looked fun. Yeah, Pacific Drive. And yeah, those are like the ones that I'm real interested in getting right now because they're cheap and they look fun. And at the end of the day, isn't that what gaming's about? And yeah, I think that's
Quite
it.
the opposite, usually.
Quiet you. And yeah, I think that's it from me.
All right, well, Gollix, it's your go.
Well, we have a short week this week, which meant that the last couple of days I was working extra to make sure that all the timesheets got done before we were off. Because we're off tomorrow and also on Friday because the boss didn't want to make everybody come back in, or more likely not, and use ETO on it. If they're going to be enough people taking ETO that the office wouldn't really be functional anyway, might as
Yeah.
well just give everyone a day off.
And at least this one, everyone gets it paid.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that is nice. I think we're going actually down to family on Friday for a cookout since my aunt has to work on, day of. So that'll be nice. Local anime convention was this past weekend. I only went after school or not after work on Friday, and honestly, there was a couple of things I was hoping to pick up there, but no one was selling any Digimon card game stuff, and I didn't see any of the other books or model kits I wanted to get, so I didn't spend as much as I was going to. But I did pick up that weekend a box of EX6 Infernal Ascension for the Digimon card game, and I got some nice things out about that are potentially worth enough that I have to seriously consider selling them, even though I hate to do that.
I mean, you can keep them because I know we both love the art of the game. So, like, if you want to keep them, just keep them.
Mm-hmm. I know, but they're worth a lot, and some of my friends are actually playing Mastamon decks. Or some of my, one friend and some of my people I play with.
Right.
I got two of the trainer that is good or tamer that is good in Mastamon decks.
Right.
Which is a very rare card.
Still $50.
Yeah. I did pick up a few things on Steam sale, but mostly just stuff that had been in my wish list for a long time that it was on significant discount. Let's see, I need to play Riven for review some tomorrow because that's a game that takes a bit of investment before you get to the part that, it's not a fast game, is what I'm saying. And I have been back to playing Splatoon 3 some. Other than that, not a whole lot going on.
Hooray.
So you could go, Adam.
All right. Let's see. Well, my 4th of July plans become muted due to topsy-turvy arrangements with the you said nephews. They actually just concluded a stay here that was longer than anticipated due to, let's say, health. There were health issues, not with the kids, but let's just say with other people, with their mother, as I understand it. Apparently, that's all been situated enough to where they can spend the 4th with their mother instead of, with their father, my brother, and the rest of the family around here. which, to be fair, is just me and my mom. But so not exactly sure what we're going to do for the 4th. In terms of activity, but it's definitely going to be less than before, which is fine because I really didn't want to go stake out and actually go watch fireworks in the Florida humidity.
Yeah.
I am fine just using television to watch fireworks. Then, deal with the soup that we call a climate down here.
Hell, don't you
I've
just have
done that
fireworks
before.
simulator on your computer?
Probably. Well, it's like I don't have it on my computer, but I still have it in my Steam account.
Yeah, it can be downloaded momentarily.
Yeah. Point is, plans got altered, but nothing too earth-shaking, since what we were looking at doing was more for the children than anything else. So, with that in mind, in terms of gaming, as mentioned last week, I've been going through the Halo Master Chief Collection. Really what that consisted of is playing through Halo Reach, which it's an interesting starting point, because that's where the story begins, but it's also the last Bungie game.
Yeah, I was about to say,
and
if you're starting
I've since
on
moved on
Reach,
to the
me.
well, it's like I've moved over to the to Halo, the Halo 1 Anniversary Edition. I'm like, the differences are already starting.
I was about to say, my condolences. Go look for the original one.
No, because the original one on PC was done by Gearbox and not very well.
Yeah, I mean, fair. There are some quality of life patches that fix most of it, but I could see not wanting to do that. So,
anyway, just started on Halo 1, so I can't really speak too much about that. Anyway, so I think that's my news for the week. So, merrily, we shall roll along to the interview portion of the broadcast. And joining us this week is Neil Rennison of Tin Man Game.
Hey, how are you doing?
We are doing well. How are you today?
Yeah, not bad. Not bad. Start of a new day down under. So, yeah, it's good. Had my coffee. I'm all good.
Right. So how we like to get started is we like to get to know the people behind the games, the studio, and all of that business. And we do this by asking this particular question. What got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
What got me interested in video games? Well, it's pretty easy, really. When I was about 10 years old, so that would have been the mid-80s, I got a ZX Spectrum 48K home computer, which were all the rage in the UK where I grew up. And I played that thing to death. And then you had to load the games off of tapes, cassette tapes, which was great. And I did some bits of programming back then in using BASIC, and I got really into that. And then got into the Commodore Amiga shortly after that. I got a 500 a few years later, and went on from there, really. And then I dodged video games for a little while. I went off to university, and I studied product design visualization, actually, for a number of years. And one of those years at university, I had to go and work, do a work experience. And I ended up working, so this is the mid-90s, ended up working at a UK government agency that were playing around with virtual reality. So this was the early days of VR, using silicon graphics machines. And I did a lot of low poly modeling, so I got into 3D modeling. in quite a big way. And we did some of that on our course. And so when I graduated university, I decided I didn't want to get into product design. I actually wanted to do 3D modeling. And taught myself 3D Studio Max. I ended up working at a game studio in the UK called Razorworks for 3 years, building racetracks for a few racing games. And then I went freelance for a number of years. Was basically an environment 3D artist, mainly on racing games. Worked on a whole bunch of big games like Need for Speed and a bunch of others. And then I moved to Australia in about 2008, and I started Tin Man Games. Yeah, and I've been doing that ever since, basically.
And it's been an interesting journey with Tin Man Games because, well, prior to, I'd say, your most recent release, you had releases that were less games and more storybooks, or like adaptation of Steven Jackson's fighting fantasy games, for example, like which are kind of game books. I'm not exactly sure how to describe them because, you know, they're not like pen and paper RPGs, but they're more than choose your own adventures.
Yeah, so look, they appeared in the early 80s. The very first book was The Warlock of Firetop Mountain. And you've got to remember that back then, kids, we had arcades where you could go and play Centipede or Pac-Man or whatever. Home computers were only just appearing. So I think the ZX Spectrum came out in 82. And so gaming back then you couldn't really, you played board games or you played sport. And these things suddenly appeared where, and there was no portable gaming back then. You didn't have Nintendo DSs or anything like that, or Game Boys. And so I can tell you now, I remember going on a holiday at some point in the mid-80s and being in the back of the car for about 4 hours, reading this book and rolling dice. And I had a pencil with creating a little inventory of all the items I've been picking up. It was the original gaming. That was what we had. RPG gaming before anybody realized RPG gaming even existed. So, it's very close to my heart. So when I put together Tin Man Games, the iPhone had just come out not long before. And I was looking around at basically my childhood, like what would make a really good iPhone experience? And I thought, wow, game books on an iPhone would be amazing because you can read them, and then you can actually get the iPhone to roll the dice for you and fill in the inventory sheet. And lo and behold, they were quite popular, would you believe? So that's really the catalyst that got Tin Man Games going, was those apps. Yeah.
Yes, I think I remember that. Like, I remember we covered the Warlock on Firetop Mountain adaptation, like not the game book, but it's kind of set up like a game board. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So what we did with that one was we wanted to basically create a new way of reading the game book. We'd been experimental with you doing just making a reading game, and that's great, and that has an audience. But we wanted to widen the net a little bit, and so we thought, well, fighting fantasy game books were a precursor to Dungeons and Dragons and miniatures gaming. So why don't we make a kind of tabletop, visually an adventure game where there is a tabletop where there's dungeons being built and there's little painted miniatures moving around the map as you read the game book. And we did a Kickstarter for that and raised a bit of money. And it seemed quite popular. So I think the original game book is about 400 sections. And when we did the 3D version of that, gosh, it blew out to a couple of thousand, if not more. And we had multiple storylines going with different characters and lots of different things. And we extended the mountain, Firetop Mountain grew. We did lots of extra things. So yeah, that's kind of how that came together, really. Which was so much fun to make. It's probably one of my most fun games I've ever worked on. So yeah, it's great.
Well, that's good to hear. And indeed, in the interceding years, you've released quite a few other releases. I suppose my question here is, like, outside of, once again, the new release, Neon Squad Tactics, are these all based off of like game books and miniatures and things of that nature?
No, I mean we have continued doing Fighting Fantasy Classics, which is the old booky reading style games. And we do them on Steam and on mobile, on Android and iOS. But the bigger projects, what happened with Warlock of Firetop Mountain is we suddenly realised that we quite like making kind of digital tabletop games. And soon after that game was published, I was at a game show here in Australia, meeting with one of the developer relations guys from Sony. And at the time, the PlayStation VR was about to be released. And he said to me, pitch me a game idea. He said, I loved Warlock of Firetop Mountain. I think that would work so brilliant on PlayStation VR. And so we put together a pitch and we put together a demo. We worked with a local studio here called Samurai Punk, and they helped us put together a demo. And that we pitched what then became Table of Tales: A Crooked Crown, which was a kind of VR version of a party-based story RPG, where a table comes to life and actually builds the dungeons and builds the environments for you. And you, in VR, pick up the miniatures and move them around the board. So you're playing like a tabletop RPG board game in VR. The Dungeon Master, we chose to have like this mechanical talking bird that flew around the room and narrated the story to you. And it was really popular, and we ported that to Quest and PC and a few other platforms over the years. So we've kind of followed that way, and then after that, we got a license for Warhammer Underworlds, which is a board game by Games Workshop, and we went in that direction for a few years, and then came back to VR with Neon Squad Tactics. So yeah, that's where we find ourselves now.
Right. So I suppose first of all, is Table of Tales your own IP?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
No, it's our own. We developed it from scratch. Yeah. Yeah.
And how extensive was an undertaking in doing that? You know, having to build your own world, lore, all of that business before you could, have like a tabletop.
I mean, it's a lot of work. Building something from scratch, putting together a world from nothing is no small undertaking. One of the things I did early on is I took a bit of a radical approach. I'd been to Melbourne has a comedy festival here every year, and I went to a show that was hosted by a guy called Ben McKenzie, and he was running a live comedy show on stage where he played Dungeons and Dragons with the crowd and would have people come up out the crowd and be characters in the D&D adventure, and it was very funny. And I realised that he understood the genre really well, and we wanted to have a little bit of humour, So I invited him to come and write for the game, and he started off just sort of designing the world and the basic story, and ended up writing the whole thing, and he ended up writing all the narrative for the bird to talk. So having him on board was really, really important. And then at the same time, we also hired an illustrator, concept artist called Joshua Wright, who he'd been doing some illustrations for us for the Fighting Fantasy series, and he was a very good, an amazing artist. And we brought him on to start concepting up how the world would look, what the characters would look like. And between the two of them early on, they're the ones that kind of set down the way the game looked and felt, really, and designed the world, with a bit of input from me, of course, because I've obviously been around doing this stuff for a while. But those two individuals definitely they stamped their first marks onto it for sure. But yeah, it was a lot of work.
No doubt, no doubt. And so, what's the premise of Table of Tales here? Um, what is your party trying to do?
So basically, we wanted them to be anti-heroes. We were a bit bored with the whole the heroes go on an adventure. And you start off, it's set many years after when they were younger, and so they're called scoundrels. They're the bad guys. They've been up to no good all their lives, not doing good things, and we wanted a bit of a redemption story. And very early on in the game, one of the things that you do, so the game starts off on a ship. So the table opens up and it's a raging ocean in the middle of the table. It's it's an awesome moment. Something I'm very proud of, that moment in that video game. So this boat appears and you're in a combat, and it's basically a tutorial teaching you how to play the game. There's the 4 scoundrels which you control, and each one has different abilities. Some of them have magic, some of them have different combat abilities, and it teaches you the game. And then right at the end of the tutorial, it basically gets to a point where there's a massive wave that washes over the boat, and you have to choose one of those scoundrels to throw overboard by literally picking them up with your virtual hands and throwing them into the sea. And you can choose any one of those 4, and then the rest of the game plays out with you playing the other 3 characters for the rest of the game. Which is a really interesting, which means there's replayability there for the start, because you could play the game again and throw a different character. I can say that a lot of the levels change. There's different levels that appear for different characters in some instances. And without spoiling it too much, the choice you make on the character that you've thrown overboard has a big impact later on in the storyline, which I'm sure you can probably guess, with how it all sort of plays out in the end. So it's really interesting. So it's a redemption story about these 3 characters in this world, and you're basically sailing from island to island. It's a little bit Wind Waker inspired, I guess, Zelda. And you go to these islands and you play out these kind of like turn-based combats. Sometimes you actually play them out on the boat. The boats become the boards as well. So look, we were a small development company. We were punching well above our weight making this game. I'm still actually, when I play it now, I'm pretty impressed with what we achieved in the end. Yeah.
I suppose that begs the question. So you did mention you collaborated on this particular project, but how many people built this between the 2 studios?
So we had a couple of programmers from Samurai Punk that worked with us. I'm just trying to picture the room in which we're all sat. It's less than you might think. The core team was probably about 2, 4, 6, probably about 8 to 10 of us that were on it from start to finish. But then we also used outsource companies to help us build the art. So we had some contractors in Australia. We also used a team of really talented character artists in India that we hired out for a few months to help model some of the characters for us. So yes, it was quite a small team, really. I think, that's one of the reasons why I'm so impressed we achieved what we did. Some very talented people, working right at the top of their game, really.
It sounds like it. And how much time did it take to build and release Table of Tales?
It's a long time ago now. Well, it's a relatively long time. I would say it was probably all up from start to finish about 3 years, maybe a little more. Yeah.
Like, once again, given what's on display here, 3 years sounds about right. Like, anyway, right. So I'm gonna ask my colleague Alex if he's got any specific tabletop-y questions he wants to ask, since he's our, or at least the closest thing we got to a tabletop expert on staff.
Not too much. Unfortunately, I've been a little bit distracted during some of the interview. I like the way that you have the terrain set up in this.
Yeah, the terrain where as it appears on the table. You mean?
Yeah, it looks very much like it would actually for a game. Although obviously you save a lot of trouble by not having to deal with moving stuff around. You can have a arbitrarily big thing and you don't have to deal with like tons and tons of stuff. But yeah, I would love to be able to have terrain like this for like this good for a real tabletop.
Honestly, the technology behind that table and how it changes is immense. Like, and oh boy, did it gave us some headaches through development. It's quite an intensive process to get it to do that. But it does look really, really impressive, I think. One of the things early on, actually, is that we were very keen that the table is the Table of Tales. It's the name of the game. We wanted it to be the star of the show. I don't know whether you've ever read Terry Pratchett.
Yes.
There's luggage that has legs that runs around
Sapient
in his books.
Airwood.
And I love the idea of an inanimate object that just feels like a mundane object sort of coming to life and having a personality in some way. And so we wanted the table to kind of be that, and we wanted to kind of as it built up the different environments. We really wanted it to feel like it was taking you on a journey, and you never knew what it was going to do next. I mean, the game starts off, at sea. So literally the tables, the bits of wood on the top of the table fall away and become a raging ocean. And I think that sets up this kind of like the player doesn't know what to expect moving forward from that point on. And I think that was really important. So we love that table. I wish I could make another game with that table.
I mean, you could make it a franchise, but I imagine that would take a lot of work.
Yeah, this was a one-off. It was a one-off project that we did and delivered. We would have loved to have made some follow-up games to it, but we had no large publisher backing. Right. So, we're just driven on sales and funding and various things, and unfortunately, the game didn't quite hit the heights to put in another 3 years to make a follow-up game, sadly.
That is not an uncommon refrain from people who work in VR, but we'll circle back around that in a bit. I am wondering if any board game makers have approached you to make it like an actual tabletop version of Table of Tales. Obviously, maybe not, having the intricate Game of Thrones terrain riser, but, something physical.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So around the last year of development, I was actually in contact with a board game manufacturer here in Melbourne, or in Australia. There might be Sydney, actually. And we were discussing creating a board game version, and they actually put together a pitch for us about a board game, which was really interesting. Like it was like, because the game is kind of a series of dioramas, and so they were looking at making like little dioramas on the board, in the physical board game, and came up with a really great idea. Unfortunately, we were heads down on the game, and I think they obviously had. I think the way these kind of companies work, they're throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, really. And sometimes you've got to follow, the money a little bit. You've got to follow the things that are going to be cost effective to make. And I just think that the Table of Tales real board game probably would have been a bit too expensive, and they probably looked at it and thought, actually, while it's brilliant and it would make a brilliant game, it's probably just not. It's not sustainable to make, and we were busy, so we, maybe I didn't chase it up as hard as I could have, but it's you can only do so much. But that's a shame that didn't happen. But it is what it is.
Right. And I'd say the timing was off, given that you were still knee deep in development, but that the ship has sailed, as they say.
Yeah, it certainly has. Yeah.
Anyway, moving ahead to the present day, Neon Squad Tactics is honestly a pretty wild turn for your studio, given your history.
Yeah, so it's a funny game. After Table of Tales, we ended up working with Games Workshop on a Warhammer game for another 3 years, which was Warhammer Underworlds Online, which is now known as Warhammer Underworlds Shadespire Edition. And anybody that knows Games Workshop and Warhammer, it's pretty grim dark. Lots of browns and greys. Lots of it's.
Was it Warhammer Fantasy or Warhammer 40K?
It's fantasy, but it's the Age of Sigmar stuff. So it's fantasy with a little bit of a modern spin on it, but it's still fantasy, right?
At least with 40K. With 40K, you do get colors. At least if you play as the Marine,
No, even in fantasy, stuff is plenty colorful. It's just not literally colorful. It's just very dirty colorful. Usually.
Yeah, in Age of Sigmar, they have these characters that dress up in gold-plated armor, running around, doing things to each other, and so there is color, but it is still that very kind of the color palette is very, it's very dark and grim, and so Neon Squad Tactics. I think if you've seen any screenshots or watched the video, it is the antithesis of Warhammer, and I think it was our kind of we just desperately wanted to do something bright and colourful, and it kind of worked. And we were pitching ideas for funding at the time to get the game made, and a lot of the people that we were talking with funding were basically saying to us that they didn't want fantasy because there was quite a few fantasy offerings around, and so we thought, well, let's go cyberpunk. And initially we went to a sort of dark cyberpunk, sort of Blade Runner-y kind of cyberpunk. But slowly but surely we kind of ended up going towards the more Tron end of the crazy, colours and neon lighting and whatnot. So
it's weird how 1982 basically built cyberpunk. But now, aside from the aesthetic, Neon Squad Tactics, it's kind of in the name, isn't it? It's a VR squad-based shooter, if I'm understanding this correctly?
Yeah, it's essentially XCOM, a more simplified version of XCOM type turn-based tactics games. Probably a little bit closer to something like Mario and Rabbids, if you've ever played that.
But
not as much as I wanted to, but some.
Right. But the interesting thing here is, you built this for VR, which, certainly goes along with what you've been doing previously, but, is a bit unusual in the VR space.
It is. And I think if you look at our back catalogue, we've always been a bit unusual, really. We float around in these kind of edge niches, I guess. And look, it's not made us massively successful. We've not turned into a massive studio with millions and millions of downloads. But, what we have done is create stuff which I think pushes little boundaries here and there, expectations of players, and I'm very proud of that. And I think that's something we've always done. I think Neon Squad Tactics, again, it isn't the sort of game you'd see in VR. There's a game called Demio, which is kind of like Table of Tales but multiplayer. That's the closest there is. But yeah, we just felt that hey, a squad tactics game is kind of fun. Play with your friends around a table. In this case, a holographic table. Again, the table's the star of the show. Once again, like Table of Tales. So yeah.
And I'm seeing from the footage here that in Table of Tales, you can actually grab for lack of a better term, the figures and move them about.
Yeah, and that's really important in VR. You need that tactile approach for because basically for VR, if you're ever making a game for VR, you've got to ask yourself, why am I making this game for VR? Like, what makes it different than any other game? Now, if you were playing a turn-based RPG or tactics game on your PC, you're selecting a square or a hex, you're selecting an ability, and then you're pointing at an enemy or another square to move your character to that square, right? Whereas VR, what VR allows you to do is to say, well, actually, you play board games at home with your family. You pick up the pieces and move them around the board once you've rolled the dice. You can do that in VR, and so that's really where the VR thing becomes quite powerful, because you're basically taking the physical into the digital, and you're interacting with it in a way which is familiar.
Now, on the flip side of things, are you ever worried that the players, won't respond to that kind of feedback? Because, how do I put this? A figure is a weighty thing. And that's not really replicatable in VR, at least as far as I know.
No, it's not. But at the same time, if you, let's say, you want to play a tabletop board game with miniatures, and you invite your friends round. There's always a few that can't make it. They've got other engagements or whatever. We're sat chatting on Discord right now. It'd be great if you can play a board game with your friends, and you don't all need to be in the same space. It means that you still have that social interaction, because you can talk to each other. You can actually see an avatar of each other floating around, so you can wave and hug and give yourselves high fives. And you can actually pick up the pieces on the table and move them around. So, you do lose a little bit of something, for sure. I mean, there's nothing better than sat around the table with your mates on a Friday night drinking beer and playing a game. But this is kind of like another way of doing that. And also, playing online, you're playing with people around the world. And I've played Neon Squad Tactics, jumped into a game and suddenly met somebody in France, and I'm chatting to them while we're playing about them and who they are, and so it kind of opens the world up a little bit as well. I think it's got lots of added bonuses in that way.
Right. Anyway, so what is the Neon Squad? Are they police? Are they private security? Are they vigilantes?
So it's never really explained massively, and one of the things we wanted to go into this game was that we wanted to not have too much narrative, which seems weird for Tin Man games. Like, we're all about narrative.
Right.
And we want to make it more ambiguous. There is a handler who is kind of like, I liken the handler to like Charlie in Charlie's Angels, a kind of unseen person giving missions. And the handler sends you off. And now there's these different corporations. I mean, Cyberpunk, you need corporations. And you're essentially doing work for these corporations and unlocking resources. Some of the characters that you also unlock via the tech tree, because you can unlock different characters to control with different weaponry, they all have ties to these corporations too. So there's kind of this, quite a complex world. I think one of the things we wanted to do with it is we wanted to leave it pretty open, so that if we ended up doing more of this, we could add some kind of narrative to it at a later point. Or, there was talk at one point of doing a comic book adaptation of the world. So to sort of fill in the gaps a little bit in other media was the idea. And we just wanted to concentrate purely on the tactics and the gameplay for this one, rather than the world building and the narrative. Even though there is some there, of course, but it's not as in depth as we normally would do.
Right. Like, so this game was a change up on multiple levels.
Yeah, it was. It was. I mean, there's a lot of similarities with Table of Tales. You're still party based. Leveling up, choosing new items, weaponry, etc. But there's not one of the criticisms of Table of Tales that we had was that, even though there is replayability there with choosing your character, the story is essentially the same, even though it takes a slightly different path. Whereas with Neon Squad Tactics, you're really just turning up, playing a turn-based board game with friends, and you're kind of you're the levels unlock in a certain order, but you're still the narrative is between the players playing the game more than anything.
And VR accoutrements aside, does this thing still adhere to the principles of tactical strategy design, like action points, move, shoot, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. You have action points. There you can use those action points to move, to shoot, to use gadgets, to heal, to activate items in the level. So yeah, it's definitely adheres to all those rules. I would say it's a little bit lighter on that compared to something a bit meaty like XCOM. But we made that decision because VR is quite brain intensive, just being in VR,
Yes.
and we didn't want players to suddenly have to be worrying about the stats and the whys and the wherefores, which is why I say it's more closer to something like Mario and Rabbids, because Mario and Rabbids is quite a chilled out tactics game, I would say. Yeah.
So I kind of have a question. I'm somebody who... Adam, you still there?
No, yeah.
I was gonna.
Did I drop out?
Kind of. I was just gonna mention. I'm someone who gets really motion sick in VR. How does this game handle something like that? Is this more where like you're seated at a table like you would during a tabletop game? Can you get up and move around? How does something like that handle in this?
So pretty much a lot of the time you don't need to move around. The table is round, so you can move around, and the controls allow you to rotate around the table. You can crawl across the table, you can go up and down, you can move around the room where the table is in, which is like a cyberpunk bar. But ultimately, we usually find, so one of our developers, he was the tech artist on the game, gets terribly motion sick in VR, and obviously he had to spend an awful lot of time in the game, and he found it okay. So I think if you suffer severe motion sickness, I think any VR game is going to make you feel a bit queasy. But I would say out on the spectrum of for our game, it's on the lower end for sure. We're not a roller coaster.
It's funny you mentioned
or a first-person shooter. We're not.
I tried the roller coaster demo back when it was the Oculus, and I found myself throwing up in the back of a Best Buy because I got so motion sick from it. So yeah.
That's no fun. Yeah.
No,
yeah,
it's not. But yeah, I guess that's it for me on questions, because have to ask the requisite VR motion sickness question because it will come up.
Right. Anyway, so this game came out for the MetaQuest 3, from what I see.
Yeah, and the 2 and the Pro is available on 2.
But it's in the MetaQuest ecosystem alone, right?
It is, yes. Yeah, for sure.
Was there a particular reason you chose the Quest?
Mainly due to support. We've had a lot of support from Meta on this game. And it just felt like the best place at the time to make the game for. Quest has become more popular, I'd say. It's one of the most popular, more mainstream VR headsets. And so it just felt like an easy in. The other good thing about MetaQuest is, it's a little less, it's a bit more underpowered than your PlayStation VRs and VR2 and whatnot. So sometimes in development, you have to make a judgment call on because if you're making a game for the most highly powered system, it's very easy to make a game that suits that platform in terms of, the frame rate or, how powerful that is. And then it's harder to go back and sort of optimize that game for lesser platforms that aren't quite as powerful. And so sometimes, especially for a small company like us, we have to kind of make a decision. And sometimes working on the lower end platform, getting it working for that, especially a platform that's quite popular too, is the best business case. And then
it's also
you can
a lot easier
make
to port
it's better to
than
make it
go down.
prettier.
Yeah,
I would say so. So Table of Tales, The Crooked Crown, we did that for PlayStation VR 2, and then we ported that down to Quest 2. And, it lost a little bit of we had to do some nasty things to some of the 3D models to crunch it down a little bit. So, which had we have built that game for Quest 2 from the start, it would probably weirdly, and I don't mind, we'd have been able to make it look prettier than it does look, because you're working to those constraints from the off rather than chipping away at stuff that already exists.
You have a base product that is viable, and you can always make it look better later than trying to make something look kind of not as good to work on lower hardware later, not knowing if you're going to even break even on it.
Absolutely. It's for a small company like us, you have to, your big studios, they just do it for all the platforms, right?
Right.
And that's fine too. But, for us, we just don't have the resources. And part of my job is running around trying to raise money to get these things made, find investment. And it's very hard to raise that money when you're spreading yourself so thin over too many things, and you just don't have quite the budget.
Makes sense. Right. So I suppose that leads us to really the final question of the evening, and that is, what are you working on now, if you can talk about it?
So I can't really talk about it. Well, there are discussions at the moment about something that's tangentially aligned to Table of Tales and Neon Squad Tactics.
Wink, wink.
But it's
nudge,
very
nudge.
early days of that. Yeah.
You're building a verse.
That would be fun, wouldn't it? If there's any investors listening right now. Yeah, the Tin Maniverse. Oh, I love it.
Oh, no,
Let's do
Adam.
Come on.
This is why we need
love
to
it.
keep,
Look,
keep
everyone
you
else
out
is
of
doing it.
This is why I need to keep you out of the naming department.
See, I'm the host, so I get to do that.
I know. I'm talking about for other people's naming departments.
Well, if they like the idea, I can't help that.
Fair.
Well, look, we'll make it full Wizard of Oz.
Oh, no.
It's
Anyway, I suppose my actual final question then is Neon Police Squad coming
Neon Squad
to
Tactics, you mean?
any other VR platform? Yeah, sorry, Neon Squad Tactics.
I like Neon Police. I think it's brilliant.
Writing that down for later.
It will be. That's the sequel, right? So we're going to bring it out on PC. So we've already got a Steam page up. So if you're listening and you're more of a PC gamer, please jump on and wishlist that. That would be
Now, is
really
that
handy.
standalone PC or still VR needed?
It will be VR at the moment. We have talked about doing a non-VR. So there is a non-VR version of Table of Tales of Crooked Crown, for example, on PC, even available on Nintendo Switch, would you believe? Yeah, so there has been talk about doing a non-VR version, which we'll see. We'll see. I mean, one of the things that we did to get it onto VR is kind of simplify some of the gameplay aspects of it. And there is an argument to say that maybe if we bring out a non-VR version, it might seem to some that are into the genre as a more simpler version. So I don't know. We'll see. We haven't quite decided yet. We'll watch this space.
Right. I'm like, and is there any sort of release date for the PC version yet, or is that still under wraps?
It's pretty much under wraps just because we don't know how long it's going to take us. But I would definitely like to say, probably, what do you call it over there? Fall, don't you? Yeah, fall this year.
Yeah.
Would be the aim.
Okay. Is that your fall or your autumn or our autumn?
Yeah.
That'll be your autumn. We're in our winter at the minute, so it's
right.
Yeah, it'll be our spring.
You know how the Southern Hemisphere works.
Yeah.
It's topsy-turvy. That's how it works.
Well, Adam has at least has or had family
Anyway.
down there, so he knows firsthand.
Have.
Yes.
Yeah, I have family. I've been to Australia, so I know the seasons are reversed down in the Southern Hemisphere. Anyway, and sadly, we have run out of time for this interview, but it has been a lovely discussion. Neil, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule and talking about not just Neon Squad Tactics, but all of your games that Tin Man has crafted so far. We look forward to seeing what's next.
Yeah,
right,
thank you. Thanks for having me. That's been brilliant.
Yeah. Right, Petty, play us to the next segment. All right, welcome to the topic of discussion. So, this topic has been gestating for a few weeks now, but we haven't been able to get to it because, as we've mentioned previously, we have been in not E3 season. Unfortunately, because there is no more E3, companies aren't exactly bound to the time parameters that E3 took place.
What would have been a week of our time
events
is
were
now
just
spread
taking
over between a month-ish.
Yeah. Thereabouts. So, we've spent the last 3 weeks covering various events. 4 weeks, because things started on March 31st and really only wrapped up last week with LRG. Anyway, so we're back to talking about proper games and things of that nature. And this week we are talking about Perfect Dark. It's a good time to talk about Perfect Dark because, Perfect Dark has been in the news.
One might say
not
it's a
just,
perfect time. Haha.
And you criticize me.
I'm not the host. I just live here.
Anyway, so obviously the one of the big games that Microsoft rolled out was the reboot of Perfect Dark that was shown at their Xbox conference thing.
Mhm.
but the original Perfect Dark game also hit the Nintendo Switch Online a few weeks back. Announced at Nintendo's Direct. So, Perfect Dark has had more of a pulse now than it has in quite a number of years. I mean, I know technically a Perfect Dark remake was announced in 2018, but here's the thing. This conference appearance, this is the first time we actually laid eyes on actual gameplay and stuff. Before
Hell,
then,
it was just
it was
name dropped, wasn't it? I don't even think you had a trailer.
No, it had a trailer, but it had a 3D CG trailer,
It was
CGI
one of
trailer.
those.
So it was basically a concept trailer.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned. Like, look, you show me a completely CG trailer. You're just showing me, what you hope the game will look like. It's not. It doesn't have any basis in actual reality.
Mm-hmm.
Like, anyway, so Perfect Dark has made, a splash. Hard to gauge how much of one because, it was, I think, well received outside of some stupid backlash from the chuds because they don't know what actual women's jawlines look like. I'm not joking about that.
I hate that's a sentence you can actually put together.
I mean,
It would be funny if it weren't so sad.
I know, that's what made me
it's not the
laugh the
first time
hardest.
it's not the first time they've made this accusation this year.
Yeah.
Once again, they are very stupid and they are very, unaware.
To put it lightly.
Because, they use the term DEI chin. Like, no, I'm not going to go into what that means because I've wasted enough verbiage on this stupid shit.
Mm-hmm.
So, getting back to the actual Perfect Dark reboot. So, it looks like they're trying to do a mulligan for Perfect Dark Zero, which makes sense to me because I'm sure Perfect Dark Zero has its fans somewhere out there. It's one of those, statistically this exists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, they're not numerous.
Yeah. I mentioned in the writing room that I accidentally played Zero instead of regular Perfect Dark and dropped it almost immediately.
Right. Did you get the chance to play, the non-shit Perfect Dark game?
I have not because Xbox Live has been down most of the week.
See, I'm playing Halo on Steam, so I didn't notice.
Yeah. I think it's just the console side that might be down because, I can't even log into my Xbox profile. It's so down.
That is unfortunate.
Yep.
Anyway, so the basic premise of Perfect Dark Zero, it's basically the story of how Joanna Dark became Perfect Dark, or at the very least, how she joined the Carrington Institute. And, went into opposition against Datadyne, basically establishing the events up to the original Perfect Dark.
Almost like it's a prequel or something.
Right. Now with this Perfect Dark, they're literally flipping the script. because at least what was presented in the gameplay trailer, apparently Johanna Dark's, I'm not sure if she's working for Datadyne or not, but she is working against David Carrington, which is eyebrow raising, but perhaps not too much so, because once again they've announced that this is a reboot, so this is presumably a fresh start. Some things we don't have insight into quite yet, because once again, this game is only freshly revealed, and even then the details are kind of scanty. They basically haven't done the press tours yet, so we don't know why Perfect Dark was selected for a reboot by the initiative in the first place. We also don't know if any involvement Rare has. I mean, and this is where our interview with Iron Galaxy last week was pretty illuminating on some fronts, including, Rare didn't have any oversight into the Killer Instinct reboot they helped. They apparently did provide thank you cards, but beyond that, so I suspect it's much the case here, because I have not seen Rare's name attached to the Perfect Dark reboot, even though it's their IP.
Right.
So,
unless it's one of those advisory role things, but we won't know until the game comes out and we see the ending
Rare
credits.
has certain. Well, it's also Rare did serve on an advisory capacity on the Battletoads game that came out a few years back.
Yeah, the reboot.
It's not a reboot; it's like a sequel thing.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, like the Battletoads 2020.
Right.
Because once again, they didn't put an actual. They just called it Battletoads. So we have to do the stupid, call it by the year or whatever. Look, people who name games, stop doing this.
Unless you're actually doing a full reboot, and then maybe.
Yeah. Anyway, and another thing people are trying to figure out is, what kind of gameplay style the new Perfect Dark is going for. Because people are suspecting that this might be more immersive sim, than what was done in the past. Granted, Perfect Dark hails from, the realm of the console. The N64, Perfect Dark Zero was an Xbox 360 game, so of course you weren't going to get, System Shock, Deus Ex kind of gameplay experiences. Exactly. Though I would say that Perfect Dark is about as sim-simmy as you could get on, say, the N64 in the year 2000. Because yes, the game was pretty shooty bang bang, but it's also it was also the spiritual successor to GoldenEye. And if you remember GoldenEye was actually quite radical in its game design back in the day. It's something that's actually not touched on about too much these days, but was really remarked about back in 1997.
GoldenEye, you could beat levels without just straight up killing everyone, right? You could stealth around and stuff like that.
There was a proto stealth system, but because once again it's 1997. In fact, Perfect Dark has a much more robust stealth system.
Right. But you
it's
figure
not
games
full
of the
blown,
area, it was just kill everyone on the level and then make it out.
Right. Well, it's also in the design. In both GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, you're not just. It's not just killing people. You got to remember the design of PC boomer shooter.
Right.
It's not that. In fact, it's it's not even a reaction to that. It's trying to do something Bondish in the first person space.
Yeah.
Which up until GoldenEye was, find the key, open the door, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And
baddie and
GoldenEye
way,
here,
kill baddie. Stuff like that.
right. And GoldenEye here, you have actual objectives.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're shooting people, but you've also got to, like in the dam level in the GoldenEye, you've got, and the amount of things that you have to do differs depending on the skill level. It's the same in Perfect Dark. It's just 00 Agent has been changed to Perfect Agent. But it's the same basic premise. The easier the difficulty is, the less you have to do. But you have to get a file. You have to download something. You have to protect the president. Unfortunately, both games have their share of escort missions.
Mm-hmm.
And they're as annoying as escort missions get. I'm like, Perfect Dark was even probably more annoying because Elvis kept trying to, intervene on some levels. So, hello?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Your light was flashing, but you weren't saying anything.
You might have caught me snickering.
Ah, that might have been what it is. No. The point is, it's not. Once again, it's not Deus Ex levels of you can approach a problem from multiple points, multiple builds, multiple violence levels.
Right.
You can. It's still constrained by the fact that it's a Nintendo 64 game.
Yeah.
But both GoldenEye and especially Perfect Dark are doing a lot more than any sort of Doom clone.
Well, Perfect Dark was originally supposed to be like GoldenEye 2, but they lost the IP rights, if I'm remembering correctly, right?
The sources kind of differ on that. But it doesn't really matter because Perfect Dark is the spiritual successor to GoldenEye 007.
Well, that just kind of for
Granted,
the
there are
kids why
also
we're mentioning GoldenEye here is because they are kind of intrinsically linked.
Yes, they are. I mean, definitely more so than some of the other inheritors to Bond, both the Time Splitter series done by people who worked on both GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, and the EA Bond series, which, especially their first person ventures, you can see a lot of GoldenEye in those games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
GoldenEye has basically become the quintessential template for a first-person Bond game, even in the modern day.
I'm like, that's like, yeah. The thing is that there were less first-person shooters as time went on because I guess like EA got tired of being in that particular shadow, and then everything or nothing was third person. And we've gotten a few more of those. But, we got a couple of first-person Bond games, including a full-bore GoldenEye remake. Really reimagining, but we're not talking about that.
Right.
And the point is, Perfect Dark was about the most advanced first-person shooter you could get in the year 2000. And also
Asterisk
including
on a
stuff that was
console.
appearing on... Yeah. that was appearing on the PlayStation because I don't think like the ports of say Half-Life or Deus Ex appeared until 2001, and even then, like the PlayStation 2 just had problems handling some of the, like definitely Deus Ex, like Deus Ex, just not a game that worked on the consoles of the age.
Really, we wouldn't get
Even
games
today,
like that to work until the original Xbox.
even then, like there were still problems. Really, not until the Xbox 360 era. You know, when we got games like Dishonored, which is an ImSim but also works with a gamepad.
Right.
You know, they had to. Arguably started with BioShock, because the thing about like PC ImSims, you know, they have the huge sprawling inventory that's built around a mouse. You know, it's why, you know, don't pick up the System Shock reboot on console, because, you know, it being a reboot of System Shock, even though they've streamlined it, it's still very much based around a mouse and keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, System Shock's a weird one because it's actually based more around a keyboard. You know, it's a game that came out in 1994,
right?
If I'm remembering. So mouse keyboard wasn't standardized by any means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God,
Anyway,
94, when you can still move forward using the actual mouse.
Well, yeah. It's also because System Shock is a descendant of Ultima Underworld, which is a descendant of wizardry and all that stuff. You know, like I said, we're packing a lot of history here. I'm like, anyway, so unfortunately, we're running out of time for this, so we'll pick this up next week to talk about Perfect Dark's multiplayer, because that is a subject in and of itself.
Yep. Man, I've heard many fist fights happened over that.
Maybe less so Perfect Dark and more like GoldenEye is really the one with the legendary multiplayer sections. Like,
fair.
You know, it's partly because GoldenEye came out in the year 2000 on the Nintendo 64. Like, it still sold well, but it didn't sell apparently as well as Nintendo and Rare hoped. I think it eventually clocked in at 2.3 million, which is good, but it's not the 8 million that GoldenEye sold.
Right.
Because, you know, once again, you know, GoldenEye, like, yeah, it was a sleeper campaign, but it also, you know, it had a major IP behind it. It was rated T for teen, so it could reach a wider audience as opposed to the M rating that Perfect Dark had.
Yeah.
Like, there were a lot of factors working against the sales potential of Perfect Dark. But you know, it's like in both games, I'll touch upon it next week, but in both cases, the N64 hardware really hampers multiplayer, but that is for another time. Anyway, so coming up on the week ahead, we do have a new episode of MSP happening in about, let's say, 25 minutes. Because Mac has announced that he will not be joining us this week due to having to catch up on bills. But we have a guest, and you know, all systems go there. So, you know, can't really shirk out for no good reason. And no, I don't consider Mac's life problems a good reason at this point. Anyway, given that we can carry on without him, we've done it this season. It's unfortunate, but you know, we have the equipment now to, you know, not necessarily be hamstrung by his needs in life, let's say. Anyway, no Friday show this week. Once again, as I mentioned at the top, I was kind of expecting to be doing things that day, but you so it goes. Anyway, coming up on the Sunday reviews, we'll be having reviews of Carry On, impressions of Crystalla, a review of the Riven remake, and finally Neural Shock. So look for all that on Sunday, and until next time, I shall wish you good gaming.